Ready.
Sure. I'm gonna introduce it with like 2 seconds and then ready to go. Well, you are here because you know you are in for a treat. You got to hear Dr. Delk this morning, so we're very excited about this. And I was thinking about how does one introduce Dr. Delk? So I decided I can turn that over to my friend Sarah Tevis Towns and let her do the initial introduction. But I do want to say, just as you're gathering, to remind you, if you haven't gotten a book, you can
found this old ebony magazine at the thrift store today.
And we'll want to turn the back screen on too, so Dr. Delk can watch it, please. If you haven't signed up already, we have three book groups, I think, opportunities to sign up. So they're on the table where you can purchase books. And as I understand it, we're down to a handful of books. So if you do want to get one, I guess you should grab one now and then.
I would just add, if you want to be in a book group and you can't meet one of those times, put your name on there anyway, and we'll figure out something.
Perfect. Perfect. How many are left, Paul? 6. Okay. They're going fast.
Yay.
All right, are we ready? Okay, roll that video. Okay, here we go.
I found this old ebony magazine at the thrift store today, and there's a UCC lady in the top 15 black women preachers in the U.S. How old is the magazine? 90s, I think? That was probably the Reverend Dr. Yvonne Delk. Wait, is that the same lady that did a talk recently on the Afro-Christian roots of the UCC? I am increasingly impressed with you, Karen. And yeah, Dr. Delk has been an influential voice for civil rights, women's rights, children, the poor, LGBTQ plus folks. She wasn't just a great preacher. While she was pastoring a church in Cincinnati, Ohio. Yes. While there, the mayor appointed her to be on a commission addressing the economic and racial inequities in the city. That same year, she began working for the national setting of the UCC, where she was the first black woman to serve in a national program staff role. She was also the first African-American woman ordained in the United Church of Christ in the 90s, in 1974. It's like before I was born. Yeah. So she grew up with Jim Crow laws. She did. Her family was subject to redlining, for example, which meant they couldn't live certain places. And she herself faced extreme racism and threats of violence. Jeez. As a young activist, she helped organize 103 sit-ins. Thanks to the efforts of her and other activists, Norfolk, Virginia's lunch counters were desegregated in 1960. I can't even imagine. Also, there were hardly any women preachers back then, let alone women of color. How did she become a pastor? She was inspired by her grandmother, who was a minister in the United Holy Church. She was also grounded in her faith. She had great mentors. She was steadfast in her commitment to social justice, and she was persistent. And she's still around. She's in her 80s now, but she still gives talks and preaches and fights for social justice. That is so cool. It is.
Delk has been unwavering in her support for all who are oppressed. She is a prophet, a priest, and a person of deep integrity. She's kind and gracious, and she's fierce and strong. Her commitment to justice is steadfast. She knows where she comes from, and she's so generous to all of us who come after her. We are very grateful for all the work she's done to bring the Afro-Christian Convention, the Fifth Stream, to the front so it can claim its rightful place in the story of the United Church of Christ. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Yvonne Delk.
It is absolutely a delight and an honor to be in your presence. I've been thinking about this weekend for quite some time, and I have been thinking about it in light of February as well, which is a time to remember the journey, the stories, the insights, the understandings that have flowed out of a particular people in our time, African American people. Those who have had, and a story that has had such a binding impact on me and my life, and a story that I think has significance for the times in which we now live. Yesterday, I see everything in relationship. I see it all in relationships. So the book that we've written, the story that is in that book, the journey that the mothers and fathers of the Fifth Stream have been on, and insights that I hope will have meaning for us. The times in which we now live, all things have meaning. And I have been praying that in this time of dialogue together, that God would give me a way of beginning to talk about this. And it's sort of how I started my chapter in this book, because the book really is a call to remember, a call to remember who we are in ways that will have binding authority for what we are called to do and to be in difficult times. A call to remember. And I begin it with the words from James Weldon Johnson. Over and over again, when the African American community gathered in the context of a narrative that would forever define us as less than, not worthy, inferior, knowing that the system that was designed to create that narrative would live from generation to generation to generation. And so to talk about it is not simply something that you talked about as if it was the past and gone, but a system was in place to devalue, demean, to create a definition of who you were that would forever define you as less than those who had created the system. That to be white in America was to live with power and privilege and the ability to make sense out of something that made no sense. The separation of people, and then to define that in a way where you blame the victim for your madness in the midst of it. And knowing that I would be growing up, my mother and father, and my sisters and brothers, 7 of us in the Delk household, in Norfolk, Virginia, in a system that was designed to say to us, you are less than. How to equip us mind, body, soul, and spirit to survive that system, to defy that system, and to enable us to be a part of another narrative that would speak life and hope over our bodies, minds, souls, and spirits. And so, for all African Americans, sisters, families growing up, there were a couple of things that we were told early on or reminded of. And in the Delk household, it was always never forget who you are or whose you are. It doesn't matter, they would say, what they call you. It is what you answer to that really matters. And it does matter to hear the negative words, to feel the negative sting in your heart, mind, and soul, and to know how long that system and way. Last weekend, a group of us went to see To Kill a Mockingbird. And we were there in the midst of it, and there was a sign outside of it that basically says some of the language may feel in some way very distressing to you, but we just want to put on notice that that will be there. To Kill a Mockingbird, how to be human in a system designed for inhumanity. The question, who or what defines who we are? and ways that will help us to live out a different narrative. The book is about a people and a journey and a way of living a different narrative in a system that continues to flow with the rhetoric and with the affirmations that would say, you can live by power and privilege and domination and control, or you can figure out a different way to live one's life. So yesterday in Clara's service, when we did the narrative and when we did that chant, I thought it was a haunting chant to begin with. And it asked a basic question: why in the world have you come to earth? Do you even remember? Why have you come to earth? Do you remember? Why have you taken birth? Why have you come? Do you remember? It's about a way of existence. And James Weldon Johnson, in the book, or in the hymn that has become a call for us to remember, Lift Every Voice and Sing, reminds us, you've got to remember that there is a way of living and existing other than the one you will be a part of. And it says, lest our hearts get so drunk with the wine of the world that you forget. Lest our hearts, minds, and soul get so caught up in the madness of the world that you forget who you are. You will forever be lost. But the way to hold on and the way to travel in the midst of the journey that you are on is to be rooted in something that has a greater power over your mind, over your body, over your spirit, than the negative realities in which you find yourself. So when my mother and father would say to me, never forget who you are. Never allow your spirit to be defined by the realities that will exist in Norfolk, Virginia, that had already decided from the time I was born that I would live in a separate existence from the white community. Racial divide, separation of the races, based on the fact that some are more worthy than others. And unless you choose not to be a part of that narrative, you allow yourself to become that narrative and to function. And the hard thing is, the narrative was in the church. The narrative was flowing in our places of hope. How in the world could the Afro-Christian Convention, this story, flowing out of enslavement, the roots to the Afro-Christian Convention is deeply connected to the Christian part of our heritage. When we take and study the lifeline of the United Church of Christ, we're very careful in understanding the congregational stream that makes up the United Church of Christ, the Christian stream that flows, the evangelical stream, and the Reformed. And in 1957, it was a tremendous moment in ecumenicity when 4 streams that had been separate and divided started to flow. Although 2 of them had already joined in the 30s, the Congregational and the Christian, their merger went way back in the 30s, Evangelical and Reformed. But in their hearts and minds, there was always this flow for unity, for bringing together that which had been divided, that bringing the church that was divided together, bringing people together that had been divided. And so in 1957, when this new moment was launched with great strain and stress on everybody, I'm sure, some deciding not to become a part of it, but those who did had two lenses. They wanted to heal the brokenness in the church by bringing faith together, to witness together on a journey. And they wanted to do it in behalf of uniting humankind. So the symbol was always that they all might be one. They all might be one. Uniting of faith and uniting of humankind. However, there was a serious flaw in even those who had a vision of unity, because at the very time of that existence, African Americans who had a connection to the United Church of Christ also flowed in. But the way they flowed in was totally different than the way in which the churches of the congregational white Christian churches flowed in. At the time of the merger, this story was in play. This story has been in play since the days that we moved from the motherland of Africa, flowed through the Middle Atlantic, ended up in a system of enslavement envisioned by those who believed in the Bible and Christianity, a system of enslavement, which saw us as objects, not subjects, in the flow. And in the South, especially in the region of North Carolina and Virginia area, plantations existed. The mothers and fathers of this story, who had flowed from the motherland of Africa and found themselves in a system of enslavement, had to figure out how they would survive. In the storyline that flows, they drew strength from believing that there was a God that they had encountered in Africa, a world view that they were a part of and had been a part of in Africa, and a life system of how one lives that they had encountered in Africa. The taproot that enabled them to survive was an affirmation that God was a God that had declared all life as sacred, all life as interdependent and interconnected life force that flows together, not separate and apart from one another. They had a worldview of interconnectedness and spirit that flowed in all and was through all. God was in the air they breathed. God was in the wind and the trees. God was in the water. The stories that they told to one another was to gain respect for the lifeline of the Spirit of God that exists in everything, every place around you. They lived a life in relationship to God, to the natural elements. They told stories about even when the hunter would have to chop down the tree to build a home in which to live, that those who had to chop the tree would ask for forgiveness for disturbing the spirit of the tree, because they had taken something of the life force of the tree, even though they knew that that meant they could have shelter. So their ability to have shelter was related to the life force of the tree. Everything was in relationship. I remember how I liked watching Roots in the early days when I would see the mothers and fathers holding the baby high in the sky and say, behold, there is something greater. It's a life force that declares all life is sacred and all life is to be honored and respected. No one is to have dominion and power and control of life. It's a worldview that's different. The mothers and fathers of this story come from a worldview of wholeness, a worldview in which all life connects and is interconnected. And even when they faced being taken from their homeland and being placed in a place of enslavement, which demeaned, devalued, and destroyed spirit, wholeness, for the sake of power and dominion, they held on to the vision of the homeland. So when James Weldon Johnson wrote, in the time that we exist, it's important for you to be true to something that can keep your mind, your body, your spirit anchored. And that's your homeland. Be true to your homeland, in the worldview. And to be true to God, be true to your native land. Always go back to remember wholeness. Always go back to remember your relationship. It's a call to remember. And so even when they were on the plantation, they remembered who they were, connected to a God who had declared all life as sacred. And it was there that they were introduced to the Christian, the mothers and fathers of this book, the Christian faith. It was the early Christian movement that the masters decided could flow through the plantation and to be able to preach to those who were in enslavement, the masters. And the masters probably decided that not because they felt that they cared about whether these mothers and fathers were empowered by that, but for them it was a source of control to keep them committed to their roles as objects of those plantations, to keep them enslaved in their mind. So they allowed religion to be contaminated with power and control and to flow. But those who received it received the word that was spoken from a worldview that had happened long ago in the motherland. And so they drew strength from a contaminated version of religion that was flowing in a place of enslavement. How in the world could the masters who were Christians hold them in slavery? So they disembodied from that and reconnected their bodies, minds, and spirits to the wholeness of Mother Africa. All life is sacred. They held on. And in hushed harbors, they found places where they could breathe life in the midst of the most inhumane situations. In plantations, they found hushed harbors and reminded, you are not a slave. You are the sons and daughters of God. In hushed harbors, they kept the story alive. and hush harbors, they found a way to plan their escape, to get away from the horror of that moment. But they had a tap root that flowed. So the stream that is flowing from this book directly into this space is a stream that is connected to a worldview of life in relationship, of life being sacred and honored, of life being interdependent, where we are in relationship with each other, not in power and dominion and supremacy over the other, but in relationship to one another. That vision of wholeness, they appropriated to the world view they were hearing, to the words they were hearing. So even when those early Christian evangelists and the Great Awakening flowed through those plantations, the word they preached was filtered through a worldview that allowed them to hear and see something different even than that which those early evangelists from the Christian movement was articulating. They were connected to a different type root. And even when the enslavement period on the plantation ended, and they went into the next phase of subjugation and control, segregation, Jim Crow, and lynchings, a system designed to disempower. They held on to a worldview. And as soon as they moved out from the system of plantations into the system of segregation, the first thing they did was to create churches that could embody the worldview. You plant your seed of wholeness directly in the face of inhumanity. And it was the church that separated itself. And so while it had been privileged to hear a word from the Christian part of our story, the United Church of Christ, that Christian stream, they disconnected from it once they were freedom. The white sisters and brothers in North Carolina and Virginia did not wish anyway for them to worship with them because they did not see them equal to them. And the African sisters and brothers did not seek to worship with them because they had a worldview that had been corrupted by power and privilege, subjugation, separation. And so they created their own churches. They created churches, independent. And so while the Christian part of our story of the United Church of Christ was flowing, it was flowing with a white segment, Christian, flowing, and a black entity that had separated itself and become the Afro-Christian Convention. Still connected by way of its flowing along a Christian scene. And that stream appropriated Christianity to itself. What do I mean by that? I mean, it used its taproot of all life as sacred that had been from the motherland and understood God and Jesus Christ and Christianity from the lens of a worldview that allowed them to see Jesus Christ as liberator, allowed them to see Jesus Christ as that power and presence calling us into freedom and wholeness in the context of the times in which we now live. They created churches, and so there was in existence at the time of the merger in 57, an entity called the Afro-Christian Convention, composed of over 200 or 300 churches, 25,000 members, with a lens that was holistic. So it was still in relationship with churches in Africa, in relationship with churches in the Caribbean, in relationship to churches that were in fact still coming up out of oppression in Haiti. Its understanding of who it was did not separate itself from other Christians who were in other contexts and were in relationship, so that it was still in relationship to a worldview that they were allowed, that they were flowing with. They had their own printing press because they could not, in fact, receive a word that came from those who still held in their minds, bodies, and souls the fact that they were not equal. So we had our own printing press, printing our own Christian education materials, and the whole entity, but still with the name Christian existing. When the merger happened, that entity, mostly in North Carolina and Virginia, that this book talks about, was in existence. Over 5 conferences, Sunday schools, Christian education departments, training and equipping for young people like myself. I grew up in it. As a matter of fact, I thought it was my denomination. I did not realize in the first 15 years of my life that I was connected to anything that was other than African American. It was a great awakening to find myself understanding that we were a part of something much larger. Very much an awakening. But the separation kept us separate and apart, so that even the mothers and fathers of the union that created this wonderful moment for us to be a uniting and united presence did not see this body as a collective entity that flowed in the same way that the other streams. We were a footnote within Christian heritage, Christian history, a footnote. They did not see us as subjects, Afro-Christian Convention, with a worldview, informing who they were. They saw us as objects of mission, their mission, not subjects informing their mission. And so African Americans entered the United Church of Christ in 1957, not from a source of power and strength or organizational life that could inform and in some way help to define what it meant to be the United Church of Christ. But we entered as a mission objective of the denomination, the flaw, that you have it all so together that you are in a position now to define what it means to be united under the cross of Jesus Christ in a way that would allow you to stand as a united presence for the sake of the gospel. When the very presence of the other Afro-Christian Convention had been, in fact, totally seen as a footnote, objects, not subjects of history. And so when you look at the history of the first 50 years of our life, the United Church of Christ says, African Americans entered the United Church of Christ by way of one gentleman, and that gentleman was J. Taylor Stanley, who had, in fact, been able to be one of the leading voices within the Afro-Christian Convention and the Black congregational churches to say why they thought it would be important for us to flow into this denomination. But if from the very beginning there is a disconnect, then that disconnect will become increasingly a part of how we define ourselves in relationship to one another. So the flowing now of this narrative and the flowing now of this story is a way of calling into accountability the church that we are a part of, and the way in which our understanding of being over and above also has been a part of the struggle that has restricted our ability to really be able to offer a word of hope in the midst of what it means for us to be the beloved community. It has been a long journey because this is the convention that my church, New Macedonia, was a part of. It's been the convention that helped nurture me for the journey that I've been on and that I've been a part of. And it's a story about how a people with a worldview of wholeness flowed through a period of enslavement, out of that period of enslavement, into a period of being a life-giving presence for what it means to be Christians in the land. So when you read it beginning with a question: who or what defines who we are in ways that we are not free to walk away from? It's a stream now that is flowing through the experiences of the mothers and fathers that gave birth to this convention. I want to read a few words and then to share with you what I think are the salient themes that flow from this story, and it is a story. I don't present it as the story. It's flowing alongside of the other streams, but with some understandings about what it means for us to try to become the beloved community of God in these times. It begins with my saying in the first chapter, to remember is to define who we are and ways that we are not free to walk away from. Remembering is a sacred liturgy that grounds and equips us with an identity, with meaning and purpose. It's the connection to all of life, the living and the dead, and the yet to be born. James Weldon Johnson put pen to paper, calling African people to never forget their story, their journey, and the place where they first met the divine. The words were written in 1900 amid the civil rights movement that followed the Reconstruction era as a mandate that would center and anchor a people living and existing in a system designed to dehumanize and deny their essential worth and value as persons. The words were a call to hold on and hold out in the context of the day-to-day reign of terror experienced in lynchings, Jim Crow laws, and a legal system of separation designed to deny them their full humanity and to keep them enslaved and oppressed. Their ability to survive and persevere, as well as the courage to resist oppression, would be centered in the call. You have to stay true to God and true to your native land. The soul-saving freedom space for living out the call was our church. The church, a sacred, safe survival space. It was the ancestral space that carried the memory of our native land. And it was the spirit spirit-filled space that enabled us to anchor our existence in a God of hope and freedom. The Church, Afro-Christian Convention, was a witness against slavery, the dehumanization of African people, and the racist behavior of white Christians. The Black church enabled Black people to survive, to function, to maintain some degree of sanity and hope, and to fight back. Why I think this story is so important for our times is that we're living in a time where people are continuing to live in despair, not hope, with a divided mind and consciousness that separates us by way of power, privilege, superiority that is designed to control, dominate, and protect for some and disempower for others. And the question is, how do we, as the United Church of Christ, in our time, flow with a different narrative? And the first is to recognize that you're part of the problem. You're part of the problem. And the very fact that we have been on a journey just to get spoken into word, into life, the Afro-Christian Convention, Mothers and Fathers of Faith from Africa, embodying Christianity as a part of a worldview that they filtered it through in order to affirm it as a place of hope for our times. To enable that to flow into our life at this time required the United Church of Christ to stand and admit and to offer an apology at the General Synod that was held in Indianapolis last year. Our president, recognizing that the flaw in an understanding of who we are, that would in fact see others as less than, and to see our way of having dominion over others rather than to draw strength, that we missed the convention and we missed the story. There was an apology. And there was an affirmation by the Historical Council that this story needed to be flowing at this particular time, affirming then this as another stream that now flows into our life at this moment, which is not unlike the racism within the society that we are part of, because it has impacted. None of us are exempt from the narrative that shapes our minds, our hearts, and our spirits. None of us escape the scars of the way we think and feel and move and have our being. And yet, in the midst of the despair of the wilderness, we try to find hope in that midst. But it means we have to face into that which has been broken. And we are broken people in this nation. Power and privilege has caused us to have dominion over things that God never intended us to have dominion over. And so the question is, how do we connect to other narratives and other stories? And so we write this book as a way to say there is a way to exist within the United Church of Christ that flows from a stream and a worldview that began thousands of years before Christ, and yet flows now through this moment as a stream. This is not an attempt to create a doctrinal understanding of who we are. But it is an attempt to have us stop and take a look at what it means for us to be vulnerable ourselves, what it means for us to have to admit that for the most part, we're still connected to the old stream. We do token nods to the new world. We do token nods to a different narrative, but we're still caught in the underflow of a stream that separates, that divides, that diminishes. And the question is, how do you hold on to your vision that we might all be one under the cross and find a way? A part of it was what I was speaking about this morning, is that it's not so much about being an institution as trying to be a river that's flowing. It's about knowing the need we have for one another and the fact that we too have to discover what it means to be human in a system that has dehumanized us as well. What it means to have spirit in a system that has, in fact, caused us to lock ourselves off and away from each other in isolated spaces rather than to flow with each other in the context of the spaces that we are part of. What I think from the stories that you read, whether it's from my beginning, with calling us to memory, whether it is flowing from that, through that Christian stream that in fact was a stream that also had contaminated the gospel based on a decision to hold people's lives and to mean that and to create ways to justify that, as well as moving through to this space, the space where the Black church was called into existence. And from our way of living and existing, there's several themes that flow from this. I would say it's about spirit and spirituality. When I think about what this book is about and what the story is about that unfolds in this book, it's about spirit and spirituality. That which understands itself as flowing in relationship to and not separate and apart from. So it's an understanding of spirit derived from an understanding of theology as the God of spirit that creates life and allows that life force to exist in all of us. Nobody has a corner on it. It's flowing as life. And it's only as we can draw strength from each other, as we can allow our spirits to be shaped and to be impacted by the other, that we can find a way to move together on the journey that we are part of. This story is about spirit. It's about a spirit that allows us to flow in relationship to everything that's around you. On Sunday morning in worship in the Afro-Christian churches, there's no way that you could pass anybody without a hug or connecting. When Tony and I would meet, I would often ask her, is it well with your soul? Is it well with your spirit? How's your spirit? We worship God not just with our heads and intellects, but with our total mind, body, and spirit. We brought our whole selves into that sacred space of worship. And we surrendered ourselves in that space to God to breathe life into us in order that we could become the spirit lifelines, the spiritual DNA of a God that kept recreating and giving life of hope and love for us in the midst of a dehumanizing world that we are part of. And so one of the streams that's flowing in these stories, whether you pick it up in the second chapter, which talks about how we organize, no, the second chapter is with David, not David Taylor, but it is Richard Taylor, which is a theologian from the Christian side of the merger, talking about the Christian movement and what it meant and how it was also a part of the story, both the disconnect as well as the reconnect. He talks about that. But then it flows so that you can begin to see how a people appropriated that Christian theme, moved it through a worldview, and held on to an African understanding of wholeness and spirit moving into that. And from that, the spirit is something that occupies your whole body, mind, and soul. So many times I think we have fragmented that which God has meant to be whole. And so there's a spirit that flows through the folk in this story of having to worship a God with our total mind, body, and spirit. Sometimes folks said, I don't want no emotion in my Christianity. I don't want to feel, but this story flows with emotion. It flows through power and spirit that has an ability to have our whole minds, bodies, and spirit. So when we are there in worship, it is a time that we come surrendering our lives, our minds, and bodies, because we know we've been impacted by that narrative that's all around us, that's a different narrative. We know we need spirit work. We need spirit work. And we come for the spirit to have its way with us. Every time I feel the spirit moving in my heart, I pray. This story is about the meaning of spirit that can break through and break down. It's about being created in the image of spirit that allows you to feel God's spirit creating and recreating, renewing and renewing us as a people for the journey that we are on. Spirituality is a big part of this. When you say my soul looks back and wonder how I got over, it's because we stayed connected to the Spirit of God, mind, body, and soul. And worship was about worshiping God in the fullness of the Spirit. It was surrendering all the craziness of the world in order to be reborn and rebirthed in a spirit that allowed us to be whole. Because everything around us was a negative reality for dominion and power and control and separate. We needed a spirit flowing through us. And when you read the story, feel the spirit of a people that believed in the Spirit of God. The second thing that's in, it's about community. It's a story about a people who chose to live in community. Meaning this, that the Spirit of God exists in all of us. And that Spirit is the way God intended for us to live, interconnected, interrelated. I am because you are because I am. And there's this theme of spirit and community that's there. It's in the book, and it flows through the chapter. Read it. It's a definition of how we live as the beloved community. And the third is freedom. The theme of freedom, that God intends for us to be free in a world that would hold us in captivity. The streams that flow from this book are one having to do with God declaring all life is sacred, for being empowered by that with spirit, for living it out in community by being in an interrelated relationship with each other, and for fighting for the freedom of all persons to be able to exist. With that, I will simply say this. It is a story of how we live in the midst of these times, and to be able to flow with spirit into what it takes for us to be united and uniting, to be able to flow with a spirit about community that talks about being interrelated. So I draw strength. It was with honor that I could put my hand on your shoulder and draw strength from you for the journey. And to have us be in that understanding of interrelatedness where we all need each other. No one is that superior over anybody else that you don't need. We need each other to be human and to be spirit. And it builds that theme of united and uniting around the African concept of Ubuntu, I am. And then to set liberty, that which has been oppressed and depressed. The stream of living water flowing for life. And when you are stream, you flow out of the boxes and connect. It was with wonder and wonderful that I saw the Catholic sisters and brothers here. It was with wonder and wonder that I see us from many different, because we need each other to be human and to be able to become, and we draw strength from each other, and it becomes a river. It's a way of living in relationship that's here. I know I've talked a whole hour, and I promised myself I would only talk for a few minutes. So I know everybody's going to be getting up and rushing out, but let me pause now and simply say, this is a story that offers a way of living in the times in which we now live. And it's your story because we are living with you, flowing with you. I'm one of your spiritual mothers now, whether or not you're ready to accept the spirit that flows in my heart, but we're here. And I'm so glad we're walking. Somebody said to me, why don't you just leave? Why stay? Many denominations, many of the African historical denominations, they created their own. They left and created the National Baptist, the AME, and the CME. Why don't you just move out? Because God still has a call on us to flow not separate, but to flow together. And the fact that we choose to be here now, to choose to find a way that we can flow together as a stream of living water, means that we're going to have some spiritual revivals. We're going to have to be surrendering, and Sunday morning worship was always a time of surrender and release in order to become whole. And we got to find our ways that we flow to each other in the midst of the journey so that we can draw strength. Having said that, I'm open for any questions anybody might have or comments that you might wish to make.
Do you want to come ask a question, or? You got a question, Rowan? I don't know. You want somebody else to go first? Okay. Somebody go first so Rowan can go second. Ruth?
I don't think I need a microphone, but just ask you for your. I'd appreciate it if you'd comment on page 122 in your conclusion, quoting Dr. Jeremiah Wright, Jr., the principle of different does not mean deficient.
It is exactly what I was saying when I said the way that many of the white mothers and fathers, in fact, decided about we needed, in fact, to be objects of their mission. meant that they did not see in the difference in the way we worship as something that had value and insight and understanding. They defined the difference as being something deficient. When you worship God with emotion, there's something different about that than when I worship God with my intellect. When you are in that place where you are functioning in ways that I don't understand, I define that as deficient, not as a different way in which we can live and have our being and understanding. That which is different doesn't mean it's deficient. It's simply a different way of understanding and embodying. And when we can begin to see each other in terms of not difference being deficient, but a gift that can come into our lives, that can allow us to move and be together. So that when we were in high praise and somebody said, "What's all that noise over there?" Or when you are in fact being caught in the spirit in a way that seems strange to people who lock in their emotions and feeling, you define it in a way that appears to be less than, rather than a way that can be life-giving. And when we came into the United Church of Christ, there was a way you worshiped that was been informed by how those who were white had worshiped. And we worshiped in a different way. We gave praise in a different way. And it was seen not as life-giving to that united, but something that took us away from that piece of it. He said it's a different way of seeing gifts in our times.
It's better to come up here just for feedback purposes. All right. Thanks, Rowan.
I want to ask, has the fact that Christianity was brought to African people via the transatlantic slave trade, has that ever made you struggle with your faith?
And that's what I was trying to say to you. The way we took Christianity, because folk have always said, why in the world are you involved in a white man's religion? Why in the world would you, in fact, embrace a white man? It was never a white man's religion. God was never simply the God of white people. God was never since the God of, and God was a spirit of life and hope that could be embodied in us. We took control of the religion and we made it into our own image. It was what daughter Tony, Reverend Dr. Tony Hawkins, was talking about in the pictures we drew about who God. We created God in our own image rather than to create ourselves in the image of God. We flipped the narrative. We want to bring them back. So when our young people said, I ain't going to nobody's slave religion, I ain't going into somebody's white person, that's because you don't understand the taproot by which we come. That's why you have to tell the story. So when we talked about what we believe in a God who declared all life as sacred, not that interpretation, that's somebody's interpretation. And that's why I said, we even said the Bible is written by people that are talking about their understanding of God, but there's always more than that. We had to reinterpret it so that for African Americans, they weren't accepting the white man's religion. They were filtering it through a taproot and a worldview that they were able to connect it and then bring it back through in terms of saying Jesus Christ is liberator. Jesus Christ is on the side of the oppressed. Jesus Christ calls for unity between male and female. It had to be reinterpreted through a taproot of wholeness rather than justified in the context of brokenness. You can't. So you got to tell the story. And so when our young people came to us, I said, no, let's look at this story again. Let's talk about this story from a different worldview. It's a story of affirmation and wholeness. It's a story about how we stand strong in the midst of time. And so from that context, we liberated it from the stranglehold of having it be defined by persons who used it for power and privilege and domination and control, and took it into another worldview of what it means to live free and human with a spirit that allows you to flow in a different way. We tell the story through the worldview that we hold in the midst of it. But thank you, because my young people come to me, and has come to us many times, to say, I'm not going to be a part of a religion that demeans me or makes me feel less than. I said, that's their interpretation. There's another story. Let's look at that story. Yeah.
To kind of speak to that, there's a quote from the book that says, Africans did not convert to Christianity, they converted Christianity unto themselves.
Right.
And so to speak to that, Dr. I've had some time to spend with Dr. Delk, gratefully. How do you think this book is going to influence seminary or theological education within the UCC seminaries?
Well, I think our young people, and I think those in seminary, are really now, and that's what's so amazing, because we could say, how in the world, in the midst of all that's going so wrong in our world, why in the fact would a Clara ever want to become ordained in the United Church? Why would Yvonne Delk even want to be a part of the United Church of Christ in the midst of it? It is because there is still undercurrent in it, a narrative to say we want to do it differently. There's a narrative that is unfolding in it that our young people, they are asking. I mean, I got invitations from every polity course you can imagine now, from young folk who want to do it differently. They know the old system is bankrupt. They know we can't live in the same way. Who was it that was out in the streets protesting injustice? It's our young folk out in the street, moving, seeking another way, a different way to be and to live. They know we can't live in a world view that divides and demeans and anxious. It's no way we can survive in that. They're looking for something different. And so they're not sitting in our walls anymore. They're moving out of the walls into the places where they can connect to each other in different ways, where they can find a way of being in different ways. They're hungry for the Spirit that allows them to be the Spirit and to work for justice and wholeness. They haven't all given up on that vision. They just haven't been able to be inspired by it in the tombs that we've placed it, in the ways that they're looking. And so to offer a narrative that allows us to be a river that's flowing out of boxes into the world where we can interact and be, where we can shape what it means, where I can listen to hip hop and I can listen to other versions of music. The whole theme for African American History Month this time around is you can draw life from the arts. You can draw life from the arts, from looking at theater, from looking at the sports, from looking at the variety of places where life is coming to being in so many different ways. Where are young people now? And I'm feeling a spirit that's there. I'm feeling a spirit that's there, that's hope. They're looking for a narrative like this narrative that can allow them to believe and affirm and yet be in the midst of all of the books. So I feel this is exactly the kind of spirit that they are hungry for, because we already know that we've lost too many with the other narrative. And we know that it is only in the ways that we find a way to build a narrative where we interconnect and move together that we can survive. So I'm excited about this. And to be an elder in the midst of this, carrying water from the well of the ancient mothers and fathers, that can give life to the new moments that we now live, is a wonderful moment to be in. But you got to feel it in your being. If they don't feel it in you, they won't believe it in you. They believe it because they feel it in me. They text me all the time when I'm out there, where is your church? Where is your church? Because they feel life and spirit moving. in a positive way. Yeah,
I love the language of worldview.
yeah,
And that's when I learned what ministry was about, when I realized my worldview wasn't the same as everybody else's
Yeah.
worldview. So I hope you keep using that language,
Yeah.
because I think we need to hear that.
Yeah.
That there are people out here who are broken, like you
Yeah,
said. There are
yeah.
people who are out here searching.
yeah,
And people whose narrative,
Yeah.
and as I read the book, they were like, every story built upon a story to
Yeah.
create a story.
yeah,
But just to be able to have your story valued
Yeah.
and appreciated,
Yeah.
just on its own merit,
yeah,
not on what anybody else says or anybody else does, just on who you are.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
powerful. So
Yeah.
thank you,
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that.
yeah, thank you, yeah.
Come on up, Matt. Come on, Donna, just in case.
Should I keep interacting? Okay.
I really appreciate your visit and your words. And to go back to what you said about Synod and the recognition and the apology that was given at Synod, is that enough? What more?
Oh, no, that's not enough.
Yeah.
No. As a matter of fact, I felt that the Senate moment was kind of a dull moment in a way. There was not joy in the life of that moment when John Doe Howard took to the stage and gave the apology and welcomed. And it was almost like, well, what's next on the agenda? How do we get on to the next level of business? So no. That was only the beginning. But it was a beginning to acknowledge. It was a beginning to put a different frame of reference from which to begin to ask ourselves the question, who are we? It provides a different baseline now to begin the work. The work begins now. It begins how you make sense out of what is here, how the streams that are here help to inform our life here and the way we embody that so that we can become the beloved humanity, the world, and the work that God wants us to do and to be. It is about reading this, but more than that, asking ourselves, in light of this, who are we called to be and do? It is a question you got to ask yourself. In light of this, what does it mean? This stream, it's looking at many streams, but in light of this, what does it mean for now for us to be connected in some way to the truths that are imparted by this stream in terms of what it means for us to be the church in this particular place, in this thing, and to begin to have that conversation. We got to figure out a way that we don't stay isolated from each other. We're still living in isolated boxes from each other, and we don't draw strength from each other when we're isolated from each other. It's only as we connect to, if my spirit is not here, Reverend Dr. Tony's spirit, if our spirits are not connected, we got to find our way out of the boxes. And that's why we're a river. A river doesn't need to just occupy. We flow out of it to make the connections where we need to be. I'm thinking about a whole different way for us to be church. COVID shut us all down. COVID shut us all down. We weren't able to come up into our sanctuaries like we had been before. We began to connect to each other through technology. And you know, I'm a people person. And so to tell me I can't go to church on Sunday and I got to be here, but I began to feel a sense of connecting to folk through technology that allows us to come through technology into some spaces where we could interact in some different ways. We were flowing in a different way. And sometimes I think I heard somebody preach the word, sometimes God turns everything upside down in order to reveal that which is at our core and to give us a different way to move and to reflect on who we are. I'm hoping that this is going to call us to ask some questions about how we become the church in different ways than the ways that we have been. The pronouncement was just a way of acknowledgement. Now it's got to be the way we embody that. How that takes shape here won't be the same way somehow, and how it's going to take shape in Norfolk, Virginia with Macedonia, my home church, or what happens in Hawaii. But what will be fueling us is a vision that is the same of a people working for justice and wholeness, finding our way out of the things to become. I'm hoping that spirits will be on fire in a different way. We get motivated. Sometimes you don't believe in anything, you don't feel anything, so you don't have the power in the spirit that allows you to move for that world. So I'm hoping it will be a way of rekindling and re-inspiring us and our spirits, because we got it right in terms of where we want it to go. It's just that we didn't stand in confessional mode before we put the dream into action. You have to come confessionally to say, what is it that we need to confess to if we are to be this united church? What is it that we need to let go of if we are to be the people that God has called us to be in the midst of this time? So I'm hoping it'll have that kind of spiritual revival moving in our hearts, minds, and spirit, enabling us to be the church. Because the world is so hungry and people are still hurting, and those old narratives are not working. They cannot produce the world of a beloved community. I just don't want us to give out and give out, give up or give out. And that's why I'm willing to run at 85. Not giving up or giving out. I've knocked that around enough, haven't I?
You've spoken a lot to this already, but it's a really pressing concern for me, and I suspect others as well. Talking across to a different worldview is very difficult, and there are people who are so fixed and are racist, sexist, homophobic, that it seems impossible to reach them. The bigger and more frustrating problem for me are the people who say, well, I'm not a bigot, I'm not a homophobe, I'm not a racist. Why is it any of my problem? I didn't cause slavery, I didn't cause homophobia, I didn't. And it reminds me a lot of something you see when you do some counseling with couples, and that is the couple will come in and one wants to work to make the relationship better, and they're usually the one who's been hurt the most, and the one who's been doing the hurting says, well, I don't know why we're both here, you've got to fix that person's problems. We have a lot of those people in our churches. Do you have advice on how to talk to them, how to try to start to break through that? Because I've got to say, in couples counseling, it very often does not work.
Let me tell you two things. I remember, first of all, I, at one point, wanted to be one of those that sat at the feet of Jeremiah Wright, because he had built this most wonderful image of a church that was unapologetically Christian, unashamedly black, on the south side of Chicago, doing the most wonderful things all around, doing the most wonderful things all around. And I was just so empowered by it. And so many persons were flocking to it because there was a spirit there that was enabling people to get excited about ministry and being out in the community, church that ever seeks to win the heart of the community and everything. And the music was the most amazing music you ever heard anywhere. And to see our folk and African, oh, I just loved it, I loved it. So I was willing to sit at his feet. And he said, why are you here? Why are you here? What is your call in the midst of this moment? And while I was able to draw a vision and a feeling, I knew it was meant more for me, not to simply be sitting at Jeremiah Wright's feet, but to be in the places where God was calling me to be. And one of the things he said to me, you see it now, he said, but when I came here, I had a group of people who were here who wanted to worship in a different way, wanted to be church in a different way, did not want to have the Holy Spirit come and have its way, wanted to be in the thing. And I felt for a long while that I had to, in fact, give my definition of ministry against those who were saying, no, you can't do it. But because he was willing to stay in that place and witness in that place, there were young folk who saw him and said, hey, Rev, is it possible for us to come and just use your church on the weekends to, in fact, practice our music? And he said, yes, they came. And they started coming and practicing their music, and finally he convinced them on the fifth Sunday that they could, in fact, become those who led the music on the fifth Sunday. Other young people knew that those young people were there. On fifth Sunday, the church was flocked with young people, while the naysayers who said, we don't do church that way, kept on coming in terms of, but he stood there. And this is my point about it. There are folk who don't see it, who said, I'm not a racist. It's not my problem. I'm not. They're locked in where they are. But they're still in your church. They're still coming. They're still in the pews. They are still there. But there are also those who are there, who see it differently, who catch the spark, and they are willing to be with them in the midst of their naysaying, witnessing to what it is to do it differently, to move. And so do I become disheartened by those who said, I'm not a racist, I'm not concerned, I never did anything to hurt you or anything, and some of them will never move from one point to the other, but they're still there, they haven't left. We work and create a vision of what it's possible to be in terms of that beloved community. And we witness to it as fully as we possibly can. And those who feel it will start moving, even while sitting next to those who said, I will not be moved. I'm going to stay right here in the midst. But something is happening. And when you can give room and space, even for those who feel that they don't have to apologize for anything, do anything, but you're creating room and space for them in the midst of a worship space that still is offering a different narrative. I am saying we are held accountable for the way in which we witness, the way in which we offer that beloved community, the way in which we keep calling people to be a people who can flow with that different narrative. And our role is to be faithful to that, to be faithful to that. And the hope is that even those who say that ain't my thing, but are still willing to be there in that midst. My question is why they don't leave or just go why, if we are still lifting up the vision of God. And so it's on us to keep witnessing and loving, to walk with the naysayers, yes, but to walk with those who see the vision and are willing to keep moving and to keep moving toward that goal, to not be disheartened by them, but to be able to stay the course. So it was like Jeremiah said, your role ain't here just to sit here with me. Your role is to keep being the person that God has called you to be, to hold that vision up as high as you can and stay to it and stay to it. And others, at time, will find their way. So we offer it. We set the table, we set the space, we create the moment, and our hope is that there were those who do hear and will come and will be on the journey, and that we will still be with those who still are trying to find their way. But I would say, I bet they still are hungry and thirsty for something. And while the language might not get them, while they might not want to be an anti-racist person, they want to be a Christian. And they'll know I'm a Christian by being able for us to keep reminding them, calling to memory what it means, what it means. So I stand in the midst of the naysayers and still hold up the vision. Yeah.
Dr. Delk, on behalf of your friends here at First Congregational Church, I wanted to ask you a favor. Would you allow us to surround you and pray for you as
Oh,
we send you
yes.
out? You've been so generous with your
Yes.
time and energy with us, and there's sugar out there, and it's good stuff. So,
No, I would be delighted.
okay. So, friends, she's been talking about an embodied spirituality. We're not going to do this sitting in our pews. That is no bueno. So let's gather around our friend here just as she has gathered around her with all of her love. So everybody come on in. Oh God, we are so thankful for your servant Yvonne, who said yes to you at age 10. We're thankful that Yvonne continues to say yes at almost 85. We're thankful for the incredible vision that she has received from you and her willingness to take it out into the world. So we ask you to continue to lift her up, to hold her up, to give her energy and compassion and courage to speak this vision. And we pray, oh God, that our hearts will be opened and our churches will be broken open so that we can capture this new narrative and flow into the stream that is only love, that is only healing, and only wholeness. Send us out this day with your love, and send Dr. Yvonne Delk out into the world with all of that she needs to do your work. We thank you, and we give you thanks. Amen. So please join her in the fellowship hall for good stuff to eat. She'll sign your books, the few that we have left. Oh, wait, one more thing. One more thing.
So, Dr. Delk, it is with the utmost gratitude that we offer you a token from one of our members that isn't able to come with us, but it's a piece of her artwork that she shared with us. Her name is Laura Martinez. And we know your love of, well, when you open it. And Dr. Tony, who also helped make this possible. So the Zia, which is in the center, is a symbol. You'll see it all over New Mexico. It's a symbol of the pantheism of God, that God is connected in everything, in the earth and in the people and in the water, in everything that exists. And we are connected to God. So that is the symbol that's recognized there. And Dr. Tony, thank you so much for being here and helping us celebrate this weekend. We are blessed to have you as our transitional, just for a short period of time. I'm predicting now, conference minister. And we are so grateful for your place this weekend and everything that we celebrate. This is also a piece. All right.
Please join us in the fellowship hall.
You're going to put them in.
I was going to put it in my office.
Okay.
I can just take it all together.